So in my opinion, libertarianism is really idiotic.
So you're just going to insult libertarianism before you even explain what it is? Yeah, that's not poisoning the well at all. Yeah, the video just started. The very first line out of this guy's mouth is a logical fallacy. Actually, as a matter of fact, the title of this video is called Why Libertarians Are Idiots, which is an ad hominem personal attack. So yeah, the title of the video contains a logical fallacy. That should kind of clue you in as to what we're in for here.
Based on a lot of really foolish beliefs. Number one, that the market somehow has magical self-regulating properties.
Well, the market does have self-regulating properties, but they're not magical. They're based on what's known as a supply and demand curve. The higher the price of a commodity, the more people are willing to sell them. The lower the price of the commodity, the more people are willing to buy them. Where these two opposing interests meet create an equilibrium point, which determines not only the optimal price, but also the optimal quantity for that commodity.
That the market can regulate itself without help from the government.
Well, the type of help the government usually has in mind involves threats or use of coercion somehow. And if that's what you have in mind, Mr. Dusty, yeah, I'll put my faith in the market.
And I've asked them why they think this, and this is what they tell me. They say that if a corporation acts poorly, that the people will find out about it, and the people will not buy their products, and therefore corporations won't act badly.
Well, that makes sense to me. I mean, would you want to do business with a company that provided a low-quality product or, behaved unethically?
And the market will regulate itself. This all sounds good, I guess, if you're a 12-year-old and you've not observed the world as we live in at all. But in the real world we live in, that's simply not possible. People are stupid. People are dumb, ignorant, lazy-minded monkeys.
Right, and your proposed solution to this is to give some of those dumb monkeys power over everyone else. If you think people are too dumb to make good decisions for themselves, what makes you so confident that some of them will be able to make good decisions for everyone else?
They go to work 8, 9, 10 hours a day. They come home, do their chores, go do their dry cleaning, wash their clothes, clean their houses, wash their cars. They just want to watch a little TV, play a little video games, meet a girl, have some sex. They don't have time to sit around and research every product they buy before they buy it.
They don't have to. There are plenty of companies and organizations out there that do this research for them and publish reports and reviews. Consumer Reports and Underwriters Laboratories and the Better Business Bureau off the top of my head, but there's probably plenty of others. Some of these are even actually done by consumers. Yelp is a prominent example.
Nobody does this. And that's evident if you just look at companies like BP. How much oil did BP dump into our ocean?
Well, I don't know. How much radiation did Chernobyl release into the environment? Or the bombs dropped on Japan? See, I can cherry pick examples of government doing things horribly wrong too. Difference being when a private sector company does something horribly wrong, they're actually held responsible for it. After the BP oil spill happened, BP spent millions of dollars on cleanup efforts and compensating, all the local fisheries that were harmed. How much money did the government spend helping clean up Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Not a penny.
And they have the highest profit margins they've ever had.
Yes, there are a handful of instances where companies aren't held responsible for the harm that they cause due to government bailouts, but this is the exception, not the rule. Very seldomly does a company screw up and get out of it completely unscathed. For example, United Airlines had their stock value and profit plummet almost overnight due to a mishandling of a guitar.
The market does not regulate itself. It cannot regulate itself, and the thought that it can is totally idiotic.
Yeah, the idea that business owners can run their business better than a bunch of random people in an office miles away with no experience or stake in a business's success can run it better. How absurd.
The truth is, if you're paying attention at all, people are terrible. They're terrible, selfish assholes who would do whatever they can to get over their fellow man, just even a little bit.
Yeah, so let's create an organization that would enable them to do just that.
And that's why we have to have an organization that protects the people against each other and against corporations.
But who protects the people from this organization? You seem to be taking it for granted that this organization is just going to be nice and play fair, that they're going to stick to their role as a neutral arbitrator. If corporations supposedly having all this power is a reason to raise eyebrows, why doesn't that apply to this organization you're creating?
Against unbridled capitalism, because when you have unbridled capitalism, you have everything is broken down into a dollar sign. That means every one of your lives is broken down to a dollar sign, and there are people that will break your entire life down into a dollar sign in a heartbeat and not think anything of it if you let them.
That's because reality is broken down into dollar signs. See, there's a simple fact of reality that no amount of emotions will change, and that is resources are limited. Be it food, healthcare, housing, whatever, there aren't enough resources for everybody to have exactly what they want when they want it. So there has to be some kind of system in place to determine what resource distribution is optimal given the circumstances. That's why we attach dollar values to things.
That's why you have to heavily regulate these corporations to make sure they're not feeding on our society.
But who's going to make sure the people implementing these regulations aren't going to try and feed off of our society? Your skepticism of the free market seems to center around the idea that people, if given power, will abuse it for their own benefit. Wouldn't this apply to these regulatory powers you're clamoring on for? What makes you so confident that big companies won't try to influence these regulators to try and have regulations passed to benefit them? More often than not, this is actually what happens.
People are always complaining that corporations have bought our government. The reason that they're allowed to do that is not because of too much regulation, it's because of too little regulation.
I disagree. I would argue that the excess of regulation is actually what's encouraging companies to buy out the government. This has to do with that same problem I mentioned a moment ago. Yes, I will concede that certain individuals will try to abuse power to try and get a leg up on everyone else. Problem is that applies equally to any sort of power you want to create to try and curtail that. By creating a big powerful government with all this regulatory authority, you're actually encouraging companies to try and lobby and try and influence the power to their benefit.
There should be so much regulation against corporations lobbying our government.
Regulations implemented by whom? If the government is heavily influenced by corporations, what are the chances that that same government is going to implement regulations such that they're less influenced by big corporations?
That there's no way they could do it.
Even if you did somehow manage to get regulations passed to prevent companies from lobbying and influencing the government, do you think that's really going to stop them? You don't think they're going to find another way to try and influence the government? You don't think they're going to try and find other strings to pull to try and have things their way?
There should be government-run watchdogs who keep a constant eye on every corporation to make sure they can't get their dirty money anywhere near our politicians.
Gee, I sure hope this government that's heavily influenced by corporations will try and make sure it's not being heavily influenced by corporations. Yeah, I'm sure that'll happen.
We need more regulations, not less. Less regulations is unfettered capitalism. It always leads to corporatism. I mean, how could it not? If there's no regulations to stop these people with all this money from buying the government, then that's exactly what they're going to do, obviously.
Regulations are actually what enable corporations to abuse their power. They make it more difficult for smaller businesses to compete, and therefore put up any sort of competition that would try to influence their behavior in a more positive way.
You have to have regulations to stop them from doing that, and it's the government that has to implement these regulations.
So you acknowledge that the government is easily bought out and influenced, yet at the same time you trust them to solve that problem? You might as well be arguing that fire extinguishers should be filled with gasoline from now on.
They're the only organization capable of doing this.
Actually, under free market capitalism, everyone is enabled with the power to regulate companies, not just the government. You, as a consumer, decide what companies to support when you do business with them. You have the freedom to decide what businesses to support and what businesses not to support. But that also comes with the responsibility of being informed as to what business practices you want to support and which ones you don't. Problem is, Dusty, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have both the freedom that comes with free choice, but none of the responsibilities. Or to put it another way, if you give government the responsibilities that come with the free market, you also forfeit those freedoms too.
Corporations would do whatever it takes to make money.
Right, which is why it's in their interest to provide a high quality and low price to their consumers while behaving ethically.
So let's say a company does something that harms our environment, that kills a bunch of people. Well, if they can pay those people off cheaper than they can fix the problem, then that's exactly what they'll do.
Yep, and that's exactly what the state enables. In a libertarian society where you have property rights, these companies would be held directly responsible for any environmental harm they cause. Whereas under the state, they usually get a punishment that's like a slap on the wrist. Like they have to pay some paltry fine, which is a small fraction of what they would actually have to pay if they were responsible for the harm that they caused.
Your life is a dollar sign to them.
And your life isn't a dollar sign to the government, which literally claims a right to the very income that you earn.
This is exactly what unfettered capitalism is. This is why we need regulations.
Well, according to peer-reviewed data from the Heritage Foundation, countries that are more economically free, that is, less taxes and regulations, typically perform better on almost every metric, whether it be GDP, average household income, literacy, happiness, environmental health, you name it. What you're fear-mongering about unfettered capitalism is literally just a free exchange, voluntary of individuals wanting to maximize their own self-benefit, working in mutual cooperation to make everybody happier.
Libertarians don't want the government involved in anything.
Not necessarily. Not all libertarians are anarchists. Many libertarians argue that there are things such as public goods and natural monopolies that are either difficult to privatize, more efficient to operate centrally, or for one reason or another are better off being provided by a state than a private entity. Or you could take my point of view, which is that government and private sector services should compete alongside each other, kind of like how the post office competes with FedEx and UPS.
For somehow they convince themselves that the government is evil.
Well, again, not all libertarians are anarchists. Not all libertarians believe the government is evil. But even for those that do you understand why that is? I mean, when people believe something is evil, it's usually for a reason.
The government is not evil. Okay, just because our government is broken does not mean government is not useful.
Useful for what exactly?
Well, there's a reason that every country in the entire world has a government.
There's a lot of things every country in the world has. Starvation, disease, poverty. That doesn't make these things good or mean that we have to have them.
A government is very necessary. And you can ask them directly, what happens to people that don't have enough money? What happens to people who weren't lucky enough to be rich? What happens to the poor who can't afford their life-saving medical procedures and can't find charity to pay for it? What happens to those people? And the libertarian response, literally, is fuck them.
Mr. Strawman, give me a break.
Oh well, they're just unlucky. That's evolution, survival of the fittest. Fuck them, they're just going to suffer and die. And to me, that's an indefensible position. Fuck that!
Yeah, I agree, that is an indefensible position. That's clearly why you chose it instead of the actual libertarian solution to this problem, which is to innovate. Suppose charity was insufficient to provide the resources needed to take care of all the poor people out there. Well, the libertarian solution to that problem is the same solution we have to every other problem. Innovate. Use creativity and free market innovation to try and come up with different ways to solve the problem. This could involve providing a good or service to the public and then using the profit from that to support the charity. It could also mean using different techniques and technologies to make the good or service needed more accessible. For example, hydroponics can make food cheaper, and there's different technologies and techniques that can make medicine way cheaper than it already is.
There's plenty of money to go around!
There is plenty of money to go around. The question is, for how long? The problem with systems where you just take money from people and hand it out is that, well, it's unsustainable. You're consuming resources but not producing anything to make up for that. This is what economists refer to as a recipe for disaster. There's a famous quote from an economist, I forget who it is, but he said, "The problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money."
Man, this concept of money is an invented concept anyway. We just fucking invent it. They just print the goddamn dollar bills. There's plenty to go around.
Yeah, what he's referring to here leads to something called hyperinflation, which typically doesn't go down too well. As a matter of fact, it's literally what caused Hitler to go to power.
There are people with fucking billions of dollars in their bank. Billions! Even if you took 98% of their money, they would still have so much money they couldn't spend it 10 lifetimes.
Be that as it may, it's still their money. They worked hard to earn it. It's theirs fair and square. Why should having over a certain amount of money suddenly give others the right to take it from you?
There's plenty of fucking money to go around for everybody.
Yeah, you're right, there is. That's why I think people should be free to pursue a living and earn that money uninhibited by regulations.
So the people that think that the greater good is really done by having no taxes taken from these rich people.
Actually, I believe the greatest good is done by a system where you only pay for what you use. So the way it works now is that you pay the government one tax, and that supposedly covers everything that you use. Personally, I think that's a rather inefficient way of doing things. I think it would be better to have a separate tax for each government service, like a road tax, a healthcare tax, an education tax, etc., etc. This has several advantages over the current system. First is that it takes a more market-based approach, so there's an actual feedback mechanism, so it better enables the government to determine what services need more resources and where. Second benefit is it better enables private sector alternatives to compete with the government, so there's more innovation.
Well, let them suck as much money out of the system.
Well, that's another advantage of the selective taxation system I propose. See, because the only way to get access to a service is to pay for it, and you only pay for services based on how much you use them, there's virtually no way to squeeze benefit out of the system without paying into it.
Completely unregulated as they possibly can, and fuck anybody else who falls victim to this scam.
So apparently a system where you're entitled to what you earn and all interactions are voluntary is a scam that claims victims.
I think that is an awful dogma, and I have absolutely no problem standing up to you libertarians and telling you that.
Well, that's just fine, good sir, because I believe authoritarianism is an awful dogma, and I'm not afraid to stand up to you and let you know that, especially considering that I have all the facts, statistics, and data that show that your ideologies and systems tend to cause more harm than ours.
These libertarians, literally, they want to get rid of public education.
Not get rid of, fund voluntarily.
They think everything should be privatized.
That's because things are, on average, better quality and cheaper when privatized. The reason for this is simple. There's a market incentive to keep prices low and quality high. an incentive that completely goes away once your business is coerced, i.e. taxation.
Even schools. They literally want to take the education of our children and turn it into a contest to see who can make the most money off of it.
Yes, because that essentially becomes a competition to see who can provide the highest quality at the lowest cost.
That's the most fucked up thing I can imagine. The education of our children should not have anything to do with profit margins.
Yeah, the system should be completely blind to market signals. There should be absolutely no way for that school to determine what the optimal cost or quantity of the service they provide should be. Let's have our schools be both ridiculously expensive and ineffective.
It shouldn't fucking be about that. It shouldn't be profitized. And if you actually look into the core Libertarian Party beliefs, they only want education for those who can afford it.
Well, thanks to free market innovation, education is basically free nowadays. I mean, just right here on YouTube, there's videos about everything from calculus to basket weaving.
They claim they're going to give tax breaks to certain families to help them pay for school, but many poor families don't pay enough in taxes where these tax breaks would make any difference to them. So they would not be able to afford this education without government subsidization, which libertarians are completely against.
Well, I'm not completely against it. There's nothing saying the government can't collect money in a voluntary way, such as through donations or through providing a service to the public and then using some of the profit from that to fund education.
So basically, if you're really poor and your parents can't afford to send you one of these private schools, fuck you. You don't deserve it, according to libertarians. If your parents aren't rich enough, aren't lucky enough to make money, then you're worthless. You do not deserve to have your education paid for by any other system.
You do realize that pretty much every company out there provides their employees with at least some sort of tuition assistance or tuition reimbursement. The reason for this is obvious. The more educated and talented their employees are, the more of an asset that employee will be to their business. There's a market demand for people who are trained in certain skills. It is in companies' own best interest that the employees that they can draw from have those talents and skills that they need. So there's a market incentive for companies to fund education even for those who can't necessarily afford it.
Every successful person, everybody that made money because the system was created that allowed them to make money.
Now, when you say system, are you referring to specific government services or government as a whole? I'll concede perhaps my success can be attributed in part to certain government services like roads and education and healthcare, but fighting aggression overseas and locking people in cages over a plant, I'm not sure how that really contributes to my success at all.
An entire system formed by taxpayers, the people that came before them, was built up to allow them to make the money that they can make.
Just because the current system we have now enables people to succeed doesn't mean it's the only system that possibly can. Maybe there's other systems out there that can also enable our success but do so even better at a lower cost.
But now they don't want to pay taxes anymore. We got ours. Fuck you!
You don't seem to understand exactly why it is that libertarians tend to criticize taxation. It's not because we want to freeload or we expect free shit. I don't think I'm entitled to free government services any more than I'm entitled to free private sector services. What we would like to have is a choice. I'm well aware that public services like roads, healthcare, education, etc. have to be paid for somehow, but instead of just having one entity monopolize all those services, I'd like to have a choice between some of them.
Look, folks, you have to pay back into the system that benefited you.
What about the systems that don't benefit you, though? Like victimless crimes and endless wars. Your tax money funds those as well.
If you don't pay back into that system, you fuck it up for everybody else who comes after you.
Yeah, you know what? I'll agree with you on that. Which is why I would like to pay back into the systems that benefited me and not into the systems that don't benefit me or harm me. Because here's the thing, under taxation, at least the way it currently works, you're paying for both.
It actually benefits you to pay back into the system because it makes the system better for everybody. And when things are better for everybody, it's better for you too. It makes the entire system as a whole better. A rising tide lifts all sails.
Yeah, just because there's more money in the system doesn't automatically make that system better. The people in charge of that system have to be responsibly utilizing those resources. In order for there to be pressure on them to do that, there has to be a way to revoke the funding.
So to be honest with you, I find libertarianism to be the most cuntish selfishness you could ever imagine.
Yep, that's right, folks. You've heard it here. The belief that aggression is wrong and that people should get along and cooperate voluntarily is the most cuntish selfishness you can imagine.
We should be taking care of each other. We should be looking out for each other.
Yeah, I agree. We should be taking care of and looking after each other. Problem is, that's not what you believe. You believe government should be the one who handles that responsibility. So, Mr. Dusty, since you're so concerned about the plight of the less fortunate in this country, I'm curious. How much money have you spent donating to charity, or how much time have you spent volunteering at charity centers?
We should be providing our citizens with free healthcare and free education.
Well, why should we exactly? These things require resources, which aren't free. Should we make these things more affordable, more accessible? Absolutely. But making them free for every single person is simply a pipe dream.
We should have a safety net for the poorest among us.
Why does that safety net have to come from coercion, though? Why can't that safety net consist of private organizations and voluntary contributions?
Yes, the government's fucked up. Yes, I'm aware of this. It's incredibly fucked up. But just because it's incredibly fucked up does not mean it's unnecessary. Just because it's incredibly fucked up doesn't mean we can't fix it.
Fix it how exactly? I'm very curious to know how it is exactly that an organization that's heavily influenced by corporations is going to magically make itself not influenced by corporations.
In my opinion, the government's job should be to maximize the happiness of its citizens, whatever it has to do that, to make sure the people that live in that country are as happy as they could possibly be.
How exactly would you go about doing that, though? I mean, happiness is one of the most vague and subjective things there is.
And if that means taking a few more percentage from really, really rich people to make sure we pay for education and healthcare for all our citizens, that's obviously the greater good.
But do you think that would make those rich people happy? Or is it responsible of government not to make everybody happy but only certain people? Is the government's job to make most people happy rather than everybody? In what way do you determine what loss of happiness is sufficient to make up for a greater gain of happiness? See, we just started off and your system's already running into problems.
Rich people will still be incredibly rich. Their lives will not be harmed at all, not even in the slightest. And those of you who do not believe the greater good is done by doing this, I disagree with you.
Well, I disagree with you too. I don't think this is a good way to achieve the greater good, and here's why. If rich people knew that more of their money was going to be taken from them, what are the chances that they'll leave that money around, to be taken? We see this time and time again when taxes are raised for the wealthy, or if the rich feel that their money is at jeopardy of being confiscated by the government or whatever. First thing they do is they move those assets overseas. They stick them in a foreign bank account, and that money is gone, along with any sort of investment potential that could have come with it. So if the government goes grabbing for rich people's money, rich people are just going to hide it. We've seen this happen time and time again.
I think both you conservatives and you libertarians are cut from the same cloth.
Well, since you lean radically left, of course any ideology you disagree with is going to appear to be cut from the same cloth as conservatism. Now, if you look past that bias and actually research what libertarians believe, you'll see that there are actually instances of where we're at odds with conservatives. They want increased police and military power. They want restrictions on drugs and prostitution. Libertarians are adamantly against this as well.
I think you're on the wrong side of history.
Well, that's kind of funny coming from the guy who advocates that a government who's heavily influenced by the corporations should stop the government from being heavily influenced by corporations.
I think your policies are idiotic, and I have no problem standing up, looking you guys right in the idea, and telling you why.
Looking us right in the idea? I didn't know ideas were anatomical features.
Logic.
Really, because I didn't notice a whole lot of logic in this video. I mean, I did notice a lot of attempts to appeal to emotion, as well as special pleading, making the government out to be these kind of angel saviors, while the private sector are a bunch of greedy devils looking to screw each other over. Oh, and screaming. Plenty of screaming and yelling. That was frequent in the video as well. Yeah, I know this is somewhat tangential, but does anyone know how much coffee or Red Bull this guy drank before making this video? Ron Paul's the only libertarian you can think of. You're not going to mention John Locke, Immanuel Kant, Lysander Spooner, Robert Nozick, Ludwig von Mises. Heck, you even go as far back as Lao Tzu and Epicurus. For someone who's vehemently against libertarianism, you'd think you know more about the fundamental principles behind it and some of the great thinkers and writers who've contributed to it. Yet again, if you did actually research what libertarians believe and understood our core principles, there's a good chance I wouldn't be making this video. Well, that's enough from Sam Cedar's Redneck Cousin. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. This has been Philosophossum, making stupidity play dead. Have a good one.